spaceship has landed. Still landed. Land the thing, would you? Go ahead and bring up the house lights for me, Mark, when you get done turning all those buttons. Awesome. Awesome. Little sound issues back there, but we're good. Everybody good? You awake? If you're awake, raise your hand. If you're asleep, raise your other hand. Now you're awake. I got somebody listening back there. Hey, quick question. How many of you have ever been lost before? Now, I'm not talking about, have you ever noticed that when you say, hey, I lost something, people say, well, where'd you lose it? Good question. Here's your sign, right? But if you've ever been lost, not spiritually, I mean, we all have been there, but how many of you have ever been, before the invention of the GPS, right? You had to go with direct, even after. Okay, there you go. You have to go with your own gut instinct or your wife telling you where to go in your car, and you get lost. And usually it's the guys who don't want to ask directions, right? They never. Right? So let me tell you, this past couple of weeks ago, a month ago, Pastor Tim and I had to go to New Orleans for our denominational annual meeting. We had the Southeast Conference, first time they've ever done this. 2 conferences had their annual meeting together. So the Mid-South of the United States, which was Oklahoma, Texas, and all those states out there, and the Southeast Conference. So we found a middle ground, and we meet in New Orleans. Pastors meeting in New Orleans. Interesting place. When we were checking in to the hotel, the lady said, just be sure that you come back in by dark. And we're like, we're pastors. We got Jesus with us. That's other people. So, we heard what she said, but so the first afternoon we had time till our first meeting at 7 o'clock, so we decided to go for a walk. All right, Tim has his little Fitbit thing on, so we measured almost 14 miles walking. I mean, we walked all over New Orleans. And everywhere there was music, we were like drawn to it. Because the music was great. Music and coffee. And they had the best coffee in the world. I'm just telling you right now. When you drink coffee there, you'll throw rocks at every other coffee that you ever drink. So we're following the coffee and the music, and we're just everywhere. And when you're walking, at one point we even tried our GPS, but walking in GPS doesn't work out. It works better when you drive because she talks to you. But in walking, it's like she's quiet. And so when you turn around, the thing moves, and we're both directionally challenged anyway. So half the time we were totally lost in New Orleans, which is not a good idea. Because we found ourselves at one point, it was toward the end of our walk, and we're looking around, and we see a sign in the window of a restaurant that says, beware. Do not walk alone in this area. I mean, who puts that in there? And then it was New Orleans PD. That was their sign in the and I look at Tim and I'm like, I think, and in the area we were in, suddenly it was just like we were walking around just aimless like 2, country bumpkins. And we get to this area and it was all guys, if you know what I mean. I said, Tim, we need to either start holding hands or get out of here. And we opted for getting out of there. Thank the Lord for that. So we're headed out, and and the only way to get back to the hotel was to go down Bourbon Street. All right, that was the road that we finally got the GPS to work. That was the only road. So, and we'd walked around there earlier, and it really wasn't that bad, but as the sun begins to set, if you've ever watched the show The Walking Dead, that's what happens. They just start coming out. And they're just everywhere. And so we're walking, and things on Bourbon Street had changed. The sun was going down, and we're like, oh God, just keep focused, Tim. Don't look up. We're just, get us back to the hotel. But have you ever been there where you just feel like you cannot find your way out? Like you're at a place and you're lost. I call those defining moments. I've got a slide that kind of shows you what a defining moment looks like. There it is. You're at a place where you're just not sure which road to take. Because in New Orleans, they all start looking the same, don't they? We would lap a block and we'd go, have we seen that before? I mean, it was pitiful. We'd have been great targets for a mugger because we had no clue. But have you ever been there? Like really lost and you can't find your way out. Well, like much of Jeremiah's prophecy, chapter 6 is all about Jeremiah once again giving God's people a stern warning. Listen to some of the words that God uses for his people. It sounds like a parent giving their kid the business. You are in deep trouble, Mr. Jerusalem. You have pushed me to the limit. You are on the brink of being wiped out, being turned into a ghost town. I'm fixing to paint your back porch red. You know what that means, right? All right. Go to the next one there. Do you suppose they are embarrassed, God asks, by my outrage? No. They have no shame. They don't even know how to blush anymore. There's no hope for them. They have hit bottom and there's no getting up. Imagine God saying that to you. As far as I'm concerned, they're finished. Who's speaking here? Yeah. Seriously? See, this is Israel's defining moment. This is they're approaching what we call the point of no return. This is it. Thus far, God's warnings have fallen on deaf ears. They don't listen. They don't listen. It's everything that God is telling them. It just kind of, you know how the old saying, it goes in one ear and out the other. That's what's happening here. But being the gracious God that He is, He offers them another chance. Another opportunity, a glimmer of hope. Well, if you read chapter 6, it's not a good picture. So in the midst of all the repeated warnings and rebukes in chapter 6, there's a particular verse that I want us to focus on. It's what Brian read earlier. And it's this little passage that's just kind of tucked right in the middle of the chapter that I think has a whole lot of meaning that I want us to kind of unpack this morning. And here it is. Verse 16, the Lord said to His people, you are standing at the crossroads. So, consider your path. Ask where the old, reliable paths are. Ask where the path that leads to blessing and follow it. If you do, you will find rest for your soul. First and foremost, this is God speaking to His people. Right? This isn't Jeremiah's opinion, nor is it the culture that is speaking. This isn't a political speech, nor is it the popular opinion. Instead, this is God's message of fierce grace to a wayward bride, His people. The first thing we need to think about is that a word from the Lord is a part of communication. And in communication, there are two parts. One part is someone is speaking. The other part is someone is listening. This is God speaking. This morning, I believe it's imperative that we listen to God. Let me share with you a quote, I think it's in your notes there, that I found about this particular prophecy of Jeremiah. He says that God is speaking to a time and a place, and Jeremiah, one of the greatest prophets of God, recorded God's words. The temple is destroyed, and he is in an adversarial relationship with the king. And so he moves to Egypt, where he lives out his days in exile. God wants to speak, but the people will not listen. They ridicule the word of God. They are greedy. They do not speak or act truthfully. And they cover over all of this with a veneer that says, it's all good. We're all fine. Everybody's okay. I'm okay. You're okay. You find your road to God, and I'll find my road to God. See, this isn't a new thing. This kind of thing has been going on since creation. And to make matters worse, they become so comfortable in their evil that nothing makes them blush anymore. Do we blush anymore? I heard one guy say that what used to be done in a back alley, in a hidden place, is now marched right down Main Street. They were telling us that there's another week in New Orleans called Hedonism Week, where they pour out into the streets and perform sexual acts right on the sidewalks for an entire week. And they looked at us and said, you don't want to come that week. That's probably not a good week for pastors to come to New Orleans. Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, I guess you're right in one sense. Yeah, it is a good week for pastors to go, but not with the wrong reasons. Yeah. But what we used to blush about, right? We don't blush anymore. I remember when I was a kid and I had a big family. There was 9 of us, and we were out in the living room. My dad used to go to bed at dark, kind of like Pastor Tim does. And just as soon as the sun goes down, he'd go to bed, right? And so we'd all be out in the living room. And if the conversation began to go in the wrong direction, if you know what I mean, you would hear this booming voice from my dad's bedroom, change the subject. In fact, when my family got together a couple months ago for my mom's funeral, we talked about that. That always you'd hear that voice, and all of us together would say, change the subject. Who says that anymore? So Jeremiah is speaking to a culture in ruins. This is a demoralized people. And he senses that some of their adversity had come from their enemies, but he also knows that some of it, they brought it on themselves. So needless to say, this is a challenging time and place in Israel's history. 586 years before Christ is not the same world as 2015 AD. Or is it? Is it? I'd say it's worse now. In fact, I was sitting in the youth service Wednesday night, and Brian made this statement. I kind of said, what did you say? He said, I would rather have been a teenager when I was growing up than I would be now. And then he began to unpack and talk about the things that our students are faced with. No longer is it in the back alley and in the back room hidden. Now it's in their face. It's on their iPad. It's on their iPhone. It's on the TV. What is that statement you made that this is the first generation ever that doesn't need us to tell them anything? They don't need information from us. It's all at their fingertips. What they need is interpretation from us, right? And as he said that, I thought, he's right. If I'd had the instant information when I was 15, there's no telling where I'd be right now. So I pray for our students. I pray for you. And like I told you that Wednesday I spoke, I love you guys. And I proved it because I gave you pizza. Remember that? Remember that? Free pizza, right? Just remember that. When if somebody ever says anything bad about me, say, nah, not Pastor Ed. He gave us pizza. So God spoke, and now he speaks. Thankfully, we are not left without a word. Thankfully, we're not left without guidance that we need. Thankfully, we're not left without hope. But we got to listen. Jesus said, he who has an ear, let him hear. How many times did he talk about the religious and the Pharisees where he would say, you're listening to what I say, but you're not hearing me? God's saying today, we've got to listen. So the Lord said to his disciples, and he says to us, if you're taking notes this morning, first of all, he's saying, stand at the crossroads. Stand at the crossroads. So what are the crossroads? The crossroads are those moments and those places where we are called to make a decision about our life, about the direction of our life. It's those defining moments, do or die, in or out. I remember when I was a youth pastor back when I had more hair and less sense. I don't know what happened after that. Wait a minute, you were there, huh? So we took the youth group on a trip to the Lake Tillery. And these folks that had a lake house there, they let us use their boats and their wave runner. And I was wave runner guy. And so I drove those students all over the lake. I was dragging them behind on the inner tube, and I was doing everything I could to crash that thing and make them flip and all that stuff. And they were just like, more. And so after about 3 or 4 hours of that, I noticed I was running out of fuel. So the owner of the wave runner said, well, you just need to go straight across and kind of go to your left, and you'll see the marina. I'm directionally challenged. Okay, just straight across. This is a big lake. It's not like there's a big sign. So I took out across the lake, and sure enough, I found it fairly easy. I was kind of proud of myself. So I get there, and I get off the wave runner, and I'm filling it up, feeling kind of, manly. And so I'm filling this thing up, and I hear this roll of thunder. And I look over in the direction from whence I came, and there is a huge storm. It's just like it popped up. It's like, boom, there. It's like being in Miami. It rains so hard, you feel like the world's coming to an end, and then 20 minutes later, it's 1,000 degrees and the sun's shining. So I see this storm coming, and I'm getting a little nervous. So I fill it up, and I run up, and I pay, and I jump on this thing, and now I feel like I'm in Mission Impossible. I'm like, da-da-da-da. That's the wrong sound. It's wrong music. Dun, 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 dun. So I'm going across the lake right into the storm. I had to. That was the direction that I came from. And now the rain is coming down. Now you're going 40, 45 miles an hour on a wave runner, and it's raining the big fat summer drops of rain, and they're hitting me. It feels like I'm getting hit with BBs. And it's like, ping, ping, and I don't have any hair. All I got is a life jacket on, and I am just getting ripped by this rain. Lightning is starting to strike the water. So I'm out in the middle of the water, and I turn the wave runner off, and I'm sitting there, and I can't see the shore. And there's no letting up of this storm. I mean, it is big time raining and wind and lightning, and I'm out there, and I'm like, all right, this is it. Okay, Jesus, let's do a little business here because I'm fixing to check out. I'm ready. I love you. I'm getting that thing ready. And I'm looking around, and the lake looks the same everywhere I look. I didn't think to find landmarkers that would remind me. I'm just like, I can do this. I found it. I can find my way back. Didn't count on the storm. And then in the midst of the storm, all this is the coolest story. It's true, too. Here comes a pontoon boat, just comes right out of the rain. They just come floating. And it was the lady who owned this thing with kids on the boat. And they're like, hey, Pastor Ed. And I didn't act like I was scared anymore. I'm like, what's up? I was just checking the steering column here. I had a little problem. And I said, hey, how do I get back? And so they led me back to safety. I actually, in that incident, I actually got struck by lightning indirectly through the water. So it was quite an ordeal that I'll never forget as long as I live. But I remember that defining moment when I'm sitting out there and I'm on this wave runner and I'm looking around and I have no idea what way I am to go. Thank God for the pontoon boat who just appeared out, it seemed like out of nowhere. And they led me back to the safety of the dock where I was to park this thing and get the heck out of the water. So to stand at the crossroads is to survey all of the possible options. And sometimes when we do that, it can be confusing because it's not always clear which direction to go. Psychology professor Barry Schwartz argues this: the increasing number of choices and options do not make us more content. In fact, they can be overwhelming. From shampoo to cheese, from the right college to the right retirement community, from where to live or how many kids to have. Abundance of choices actually makes us less happy and more stressed. You see, every day, you and I stand at a crossroad of decisions. Far beyond shampoo and cheese or what car to buy or who to marry or any of those other questions. Every time that you are faced with a moral decision, every time that you are tempted to sin, every time that we are tempted to walk away from God, every time that we are enticed or lured into an immoral or illicit relationship, you and I are at a crossroad. You see, God's people were at a crossroad. They were at a point of no return. So then God goes on to say, and this is a powerful statement, He says, watch out. I am putting roadblocks and barriers on the road that you're taking. Do you see God? His ferocious love and His furious grace toward us? He sees His people heading headlong into destruction. And what does He do? He says, I know, I'll put up roadblocks. I'll put up barriers. I'll put up ways to stop them, to slow them down, to get them to stop and think for a minute. Is this the right way to go? Those moments where you're headed in a direction or you're getting ready to do something and that little voice says, don't do it. It's not a good idea. That's going to cause pain. That's where it used to be. And so what do? We turn up the radio. We find distraction. We find ways to silence God's voice. God puts up barriers and roadblocks. He's saying, don't do it. Don't go that direction. But what do? What did God's people do? They kicked down every barrier that God put in front of them. So God says you're standing at a crossroad. Next thing He tells us to do is we need to study our choices. Study our choices. He says stand at a crossroad, right? And then He says you need to look around you. You need to study the landscape. One rabbi says you need to consider the direction of your life. This is an invitation for us to take an honest look at what is happening around us in the world. It's a call to have ears to hear what the Lord is saying. It's a call to have your eyes open to what is happening around us in our lives and in the world. It is a call to stand at the crossroad and to look and to gaze. This life is passing you by. How are you spending your time? Where is your life going? What is concerning you? What are you worried about? What are you missing out on? What's missing inside of you? What direction has your life taken in the last year, in the last 2 years? Are you at a place now where you're standing and you're like, how did I get here? How did I wind up here in the middle of a lake with a storm all around me and I don't have a clue which way to turn? Is it the road that you want to be on? Or do you feel lost? Like I was. I'm grateful for the pontoon boats. I'm grateful for the moments and the times that God reaches out because I needed His help. And I promise you, if you stand at that crossroad, and if you look around you and you really look around you, He'll show you. He'll show you. So God is speaking. He says, look, study, consider your life. Ask yourselves, am I where I need to be? Is this what I want from life? Am I in a good place or am I lost? Stand at the crossroad. Consider your choices. And if faith is a part of your life, I believe that God will show you and that God will speak to you. So God says, stand at the crossroad and look. And then He tells us to ask for His ancient paths. In other words, God is inviting us to solicit His directions. Solicit His directions. So what is the ancient path? What is that? Well, it's not the next cool thing. It's not always the next relevant thing. It's not the newest theology or the coolest program or the hippest pastor with his skinny jeans and sideburns. Two things you'll never see me with. Because skinny jeans are a part of the curse and end times, and those are like a trap from hell. At least they look like that to me. I'm just saying. If you're wearing some, I'm really sorry. For you, and then I said it, really. For a Christian, there are well-traveled ancient paths that started 3,000 years ago. As God called Abraham and Sarah to trust Him. As God called Moses to lead His people. The path that people took that led them from slavery to freedom. It's the path that led God's people to amazing heights of success, from the kingdoms of David and Solomon and the building of the temple to the exile of God's people to Assyria and Babylon and the ultimate destruction of the temple. Yet, through all of that, God gave us prophets and priests like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Samuel and Nathan, all sent to steer us back to that ancient path. A path that has been identified by John the Baptist in the wilderness as he pointed to Jesus, the path, who said of Himself, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. Eugene Peterson once said that the way is the most frequently avoided metaphor among Christians in our time. Because it says the way means to do it the way Jesus did it, becoming absolutely needy and dependent upon the Father. As I've been reading in John and my devotions this past week, every time Jesus confronts the religious people and the Pharisees, he keeps reminding them, hey guys, it's not me. What you see me doing is what the Father has told me. Jesus over and over repeatedly says, I am dependent totally on my relationship with my Father. So the ancient path is to do it the way Jesus did it. Is to live our lives the way Jesus lived. Everybody remembers the old bracelet, right? WWJD. It's not a bad question to ask yourself. But don't water your answer down to make it okay with what you're doing. Keep going back to the ancient path. That path is summarized in a very popular proverb that most all of you probably knows. As we begin to recite it, you'll remember it. And it's Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. And it starts out with us learning how to trust in the Lord with all your heart. You see, it's a trust thing. When you come to Christ, when you invite, as that young man in first service gave his heart to Jesus this morning. And we always say, man, first service, people probably love Jesus because they got up early to get here. And yet, in the midst of all our first service crowd, there's this young man who'd never asked Jesus to be the Lord of his life. And I told him, I said, it's Troy. I said, dude, you got to put your trust in the Lord. All of your heart. All of it. And don't lean on what you think is right. In all your ways, acknowledge him. And look what he does. He puts you on that path. That ancient path. There are men and women for the last 30 centuries who have walked this ancient path. They have lived sacrificially. They have lived a life of holiness. They have lived a life filled with spiritual disciplines and intercession, showing passion and mercy and love. And they're passing on that heritage. They're passing on that baton to this generation to pass it on to the next generation. That is the path that we are called. It's all about hearing the gospel invitation of Jesus who said, come and follow me. In other words, lastly, God is calling us to stride on his path. It's a call to stride on his path, the way Jesus walked. When you and I are standing at a crossroad looking around, when you're getting ready to make a decision about your life, God says, look for and consider my ancient path where the good way lies. God's way. And then walk in it. Walk in it. This isn't rocket science. This path has always been a way of happiness. This path has always been a way of blessing. It's always been a way that God has been closest to his people. It has always been a way that has been practical. It's always been a way of being in the middle of his will, but it's also the hard road and a narrow road. Jesus said that wide is the path that leads to destruction. It's even got a turning lane and a fast lane in it. And he says, many will take that road. There's nothing more relaxing than getting off of a dirt road where you're tearing up your car and you finally reach the paved road. You know what that feels? Remember that? It's just like, even your wheels are like, thanks, dude. Right? It's just like you can relax. Jesus says, stay. Jesus was the first off-roader, I guess is what it was. The first to kind of ride four-wheelers. He says, narrow is the path that leads to life. And it's so narrow that only you can make it. You can't bring your kids with you. You can't carry them with you. You can't get all your stuff and your children and your dogs and try to make it through that path. Now, you can lead them to follow you, but they have to make their choice on their own. Jesus says, choose the narrow path. So God says, ask for the ancient path where the good way lies and walk in it. In other words, he says that Christianity is not only a destination, it's a journey. It's a process and not just a status. When you accept Jesus, Troy, that young man who accepted Jesus, he began a journey today. He didn't get all that he needs and then he's done, unless he was to die in a car accident going home. Right? This is a journey for us. It is a walk for us. So walk in his way and stay in his way. Eugene Peterson described walking with God and the Christian life. He says it is a long obedience in the same direction. So, to walk somewhere is to have the intention to make one choice and not the other. To arrive in one place and not another. You see, the ancient path, the good way, rules out a lot of other alternative paths that lead to death and destruction. So Jeremiah tells us that when we walk in his ways, we will find rest for our souls. Now, let's be honest. How many of us wants rest for our souls? Okay, 6 of you want it. Oh, there's more over here. Come on. How many of us want rest for our souls? All of us do. Of course. That's a silly question, Pastor. But if we're honest, are we willing to do what it takes to find rest for our souls? I mean, I know life gets tough. Every day, work gets harder, or work gets harder to find, right? Tensions rise in the home. Your soul begins to be distressed. Work gets harder. Tensions are up. The family hardships, suffering, pain, sickness. Sometimes making choices is exhausting and confusing. I get that. I understand it. I live there. Well, this morning, that may be where you are today. You may feel like you identify with where I was at on that Wave Runner. That you're standing in the middle of a huge storm. And it's so bad that you can't even see the shoreline. You can't even see the shoreline. Maybe you're at a crossroad in your life and there's several options that you need to take in your life. And God is saying, look to the ancient way. Ironically, it's kind of funny that the best way to walk into the future is to take the ancient path. Isn't that crazy? The best way for us to truly have that rest for our souls is to choose the old way. It's to choose his way. You guys will come on. So while you're standing at the crossroads, God says, consider your path. Ask where the old, reliable paths are, the ancient ways. Seek after God's ways for your life. Ask where the path is that leads to blessing and follow it. Remember, God's ways don't always make sense. It's never the easy path. But he promises to be faithful. If you do, you'll find rest for your souls. This means that you can find peace in your heart and rest for your souls. Sounds great, doesn't it? Sounds great, doesn't it? But how many of us truly long for that in our lives. A lot of people say they want it, but how many of us choose His path over our paths? You see, there's a final word there at the bottom of your outline that is truly devastating. Because Israel's response is no. That's not the road we want. Are you kidding me? After all the warnings, as God has laid it out before them, He's put up roadblocks. How many times have I been around people? The answer's right in front of them. And they look at me and they say, no. That's not the path that I want. And no matter how many times God reaches out, no matter how many times God leans in and says, if you'll just do this, you'll find rest, you'll find the peace that you've been drinking yourself to sleep to try to numb the pain, if you'll put your trust in me. And so many times we tell Him, no, that's not the path that I want. So maybe that's you this morning. Maybe you've been resisting Him. Maybe there's little things in your life that you've just kind of been holding on to, and maybe there's big things. This morning, as the worship team leads us, Mark, if you'll kill the house lights, I invite you, just you, not you and somebody else, but I want you right now to envision yourself at a crossroad, to envision yourself in a place where you've got to choose His ways above yours. And if you're real honest, you know what they are. And as our musicians and worship team lead us, I want to invite you to be at that place of saying, yes, I choose your way. I choose your way. Would you stand with me as the team leads us this morning?